Can I start? I can.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm holding this press conference to clarify some points with regard what happened today in the General Assembly meeting called for by the PGA. As you are all aware, the PGA has violated all kind of rules and procedures related to the mechanisms agreed upon by the international community on how to undertake the General Assembly business. The PGA did not consult with the Syrian government in advance of this meeting. This is the first violation. And the PGA violated his commitments in his capacity as President of the General Assembly when he cut off the media coverage of the meeting, in spite of the fact that, as you are all aware, he sent to all the reporters through his spokesperson a note informing all of you that the meeting is open to the media and to the reporters, as well as to the UNTV and webcast. And this is a document issued by his spokesperson and sent to all of you, certifying the accuracy of what I'm saying. This is the second violation. The third violation is that he prearranged a prefabricated meeting to defame Syria through orchestrating a session where only Ambassador of Saudi Arabia spoke, plus Kofi Annan, as if this meeting was pre-scheduled and pre-arranged in order to give the floor exclusively to the point of view of Qatar through the PGA himself, as well as to the ambassador of Saudi Arabia. This is the third violation, meaning that he didn't give the opportunity to the other ambassadors to address the meeting and to address the audience. That was the third violation. The fourth violation is related to the way he undertook the business of the session, of the meeting. He ignored, condoned in a very ridiculous manner my repetitive request to take the floor on a point of order, then on a second point of order, then when I asked to take the floor at the end. That was the fourth violation. The fifth violation is that, and in my humble opinion, that was the most important one he made. When I asked him to call on the meeting to observe a minute of silence for the souls of the victims, all the victims that have fallen down in Syria so far. Not only he rejected this request, not only he ignored this simple request, but he avoided even to answer appropriately my question and my request. Meaning that the purpose of the meeting for him was how to defame the reputation of Syria, not to help stopping the violence in Syria and to put an end to the unrest in some hot spots in the country. So these violations have confirmed altogether our point of view, as well as many ambassadors' opinions, that the PGA has misused his post as PGA to impose and dictate on the member states the Qatari and Saudi agendas, rather than to deal, seriously speaking, with the so-called Syrian crisis in implementation of Mr. Kofi Annan's six-points plan. By the way, Mr. Kofi Annan, in his introductory remarks, gave credit to the Syrian government's commitment towards his plan, and he said it in a very clear-cut way, very crystal-cut way, that the Syrian government is fully committed to the success of the mission. So today's meeting was really a pity. And the PGA has set a precedent, a very bad precedent, in the business of the General Assembly. He will have, and his country with him, to bear the responsibility of his acts. Even when the Russian ambassador asked for a point of order, and he politely indicated to the PGA that he didn't set the rules and procedures from the beginning, and he asked the PGA whether his rulings is related to the meeting, to stick to question and answers exercise or to make statements. He didn't even answer that. Number one, because he is not qualified enough to know the rules and procedures. Number two, because he didn't want to engage, politically speaking, with a heavyweight in the United Nations. Number three, because he prefabricated all this meeting in order to give the floor only to Saudi Arabia ambassadors, as well as to himself and the ambassador of the European Union. By the way, according to the rules and procedures set up by the General Assembly himself under the chairmanship of that president, he should have given the floor to the Russian ambassador before giving the floor to the European Union ambassador. So this is a sixth violation on his side. I am in your hands.
I'm sorry, the UNCA always goes first.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for this conference. And my question is this: when was presented the other day by the PGA this meeting, or this section, if you want to call it, was simply saying that it was to hear Kofi Annan. Now you're educated us about all this procedure, who comes first, Russian. But bottom line, you said that there was a presentation, and I consider personally that the presentation, to hear from Kofi Annan, we know the Qatari position or the President of the General Assembly position, and we heard the Secretary General new position after listening from Kofi Annan. What's your point to engage in a strategic duel against the Qatari or regarding the legitimacy of having the floor or the substance of the issue that is the Syrian crisis?
Thank you very much. I will engage with you on all the very important points you have raised. But first of all, the purpose of my meeting with you today is to clarify my government's position, as well as to show to all of you that the PGA is a biased person, deceiving all of us, cheating on his mandate, overcoming the rules and procedures inappropriately, and serving his national agenda rather than representing the collective agenda of the plenary. Otherwise, he wouldn't have cut off the media coverage, and he wouldn't have asked the reporters to leave, and he wouldn't have had to stop me while reading my statement. This is why I said he committed a serial of violations while presiding over the destiny of the plenary. This is very important as a starting point to assess what's going on. Then why he called for that meeting as quickly as possible? He did it because, honestly speaking, I think he didn't expect the Security Council members to reach a consensus over the content of the presidential statement. He was betting on the fact that the Security Council members will not reach a consensus on the content of that PR. When he understood late night yesterday, that there is a chance that the members would reach an understanding, a common understanding over the PR content, then he moved to declare his intention for this meeting today. Another point, as I said at the beginning, if he had any slight good faith, he would have respected his own instructions of calling on the reporters and the media and the UN TV and the webcasts to come to the meeting. This is his own instructions sent to all of you. But you know what? They didn't want to give Syria, through my humble person, any chance to address the audience and to explain how committed we are towards the 6 points plan of Mr. Kofi Annan. And he didn't want anybody to hear from me, through me, any criticism of the policies of his country, as well as Saudi Arabia and Turkey, who organized the meeting in Istanbul.
Pamela Fall from CBS News. Mr. Ambassador, could you give us an update on the Syrian withdrawal of forces and the implementation of the Annan plan?
Mr. Annan got on a regular basis, almost on a daily basis, detailed information from the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Damascus on the progress in implementing the 6 points plan. And Mr. Annan today, in his briefing to the General Assembly plenary, confirmed that the Syrian government is cooperating with him, fully cooperating with him in order to implement the 6 points plan. However, there is one point, one very important point related to the implementation of this 6 points plan. And here I'm referring to the fact that Mr. Annan did not yet get any assurances or any guarantees or any commitment from the other parties involved in sponsoring, arming, and protecting the armed groups in Syria. And he said it in his exchange of letters with our minister. He said it, that he didn't get yet that guarantees or commitment from the other sides. Please.
Thank you. My name is Masud. I represent Dawn of Pakistan. You have said that, I just want to be very clear on these rules that you're talking about, that he has violated, and that you basically say about 6 of them that he violated. These are the rules of the plenary that you're referring to? That he should have allowed the Russian ambassadors to speak, he should have allowed you to speak.
According to the General Assembly that has endorsed the new membership of the European Union, we had a very thorough and deep discussion at that moment on whether the European Union membership, the new European Union membership, should come before member states or after. Then we agreed as member states that the European Union could take the floor once the member states have made their contributions. So this is written in the General Assembly resolution regulating the prescience of speaking in the General Assembly. Yes.
Talal Hash from Al Arabiya News Channel. Would Syria accept the presence of military with the observation mission or monitoring mission? I've heard some countries talking about the need to supply also some military forces to protect the observers. Would Syria accept in its own territory the presence of international force with the mission? And my second question is, would you accepted the withdrawal plan by the 10th from with Kofi Annan? Does that include the police forces in these cities? They are not military, but the understanding of the Syrian government, does the withdrawal plans by the 10th of April, does it include also police forces that exist in these cities to keep the peace?
The 6 points plan of Mr. Kofi Annan was agreed by the Syrian government. What you have raised, the second part of your question, is an integral part of the plan. The plan speaks about deployment of observers from the population centers, withdrawal of the heavy army weapons from the population areas, population centers. The item related to this issue does not speak about withdrawal of the police forces, because Syria is a sovereign state, and Mr. Kofi Annan acknowledged that the protection of the civilians is up to the Syrian government forces. So the government will still keep its law enforcement forces wherever it deems necessary. And Mr. Kofi Annan knows that. He knows that very well. This is with regard to the second part of your question. What was the first part?
The first part, second part was with any mission, any monitoring mission, would Syria allow the presence of military, international military force?
No. There will be only observers.
Only
there
civilian?
there will be only observers, and the mechanisms as well as the nature as well as the mandate are all being discussed right now with the Mr. Anan's technicians
But no armed
team.
No armed observers,
What do you mean by armed?
you know, carrying guns.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea. Please. Yeah.
Are you going to follow this evaluation formally?
Yes.
Okay, two questions. One, I wondered if you'll make your statement available, and the PGA did say that he would allow 3 minutes for people to speak, and then suddenly you're saying everything was cut off. So I'm wondering if you have any idea why he would say he's giving 3 minutes, and then the TV goes out, and then he cuts you off and cuts off anybody but particular people. And then the second is, there was a Arab League observer mission. I'm wondering if Kofi Annan is aware of the report of that mission, and if you know if the Syrian government, I know, is aware of it, and if Kofi Annan in the negotiations for planning for the new observer mission will build on the lessons from that. Can you give us any insight into that?
Number one, the PGA, as you know, cut off the media coverage on purpose in order to prevent me from reaching to the international public opinion as well as to the member states. He did it, and that, according to my humble knowledge, it never happened in the past. It never happened in the past. That means he was scared of the truth. That was not only him, those who pre-arranged the stage of the meeting, as we say. They were scared to give the floor to the Syrian ambassador to express the official point of view of Syria. I think he learned a lesson from the previous meetings. And honestly speaking, I would like to tell you my personal feeling, at least, that the PGA has exercised today a kind of media terrorism on the member states. Terrorism is not only about killings. There might be political terrorism. There might be media terrorism. There might be economic terrorism. And today the PGA has usurped his post and exercised against me personally a kind of media terrorism and diplomatic terrorism. So he should bear the responsibility of his acts. I think he is regretting what he did because it was a scandalous behavior coming from him. Please.
Some people said that.
And sorry, your second question, very important. With regard whether Mr. Kofi Annan was aware of the Arab League's observers. The report, which is more important, yes. I think he did. I think that the PGA himself was trying to avoid the issuance of another positive report by the new team of the observers, the UN observers. I will tell you why. Because when the Arab League's observers report was published, it was not sent to the Security Council, as you all know, at the beginning. It was not even translated, and nobody was aware of it in the Security Council.
But it's a public document now.
It became later on a public document upon our own request. But somebody in the coulisses, in the couloirs of the UN, tried very hard to put it aside. They didn't succeed because we asked, formally speaking, and the other delegations at the Security Council asked also, China, Russia, India, Brazil, whatever, asked to have the report available to the member states. Something was done partially speaking because they didn't have enough time to translate the whole content. We did it in the Syrian mission. We forwarded to some member states in the council, one day before the session of the council was held, a brief of the most important points of that report. The point is that, and this is very important, when we succeeded in conveying the content of the report to the members of the Security Council, immediately the Gulf Arab states decided to withdraw their observers from the mission in order to kill any chance for this mission to continue its job. So their bad faith and bad intentions appeared long time ago when the issue of the Arab League observers was at the table. Sorry for...
Some officials of the United Nations suggested that they should have approached the office of the PGA in order to have your statement presented at the unofficial meeting, as they called it. Do you think that this is the procedure that should have been followed?
The PGA did not consult with us, so we were not aware of his intention to ask for that meeting. So that was what I said at the beginning, a first violation. He did not consult with us. He was trying to overcome our rights as member states in the General Assembly. He called for a meeting on Syria without previous consultation in advance with us. And this in itself shows that from the beginning he had bad intentions towards us. One more point. He spoke in his introductory remarks about democracy and human rights. This is really ridiculous, coming from somebody whose country does not have a constitution, does not have a parliament, whose population is almost the inhabitants of a small neighborhood in Damascus, trying to manipulate everybody through the petrodollars, lying on everybody, causing the division of Sudan, creating troubles between Eritrea and Djibouti and Ethiopia, participating with the NATO in bombing Libya, while Qatar is, as you know, a member of the Arab League, and Qatar is a signatory member in the Arab League of the Arab Pact of Mutual Defense. So they went too far, and they are going too far in their very light diplomacy.
Another thing regarding the talking to the opposition, some officials, Mr. Nasser Qudwa, suggested that the opposition is talking in a coherent voice now, and that they could come with a coherent answer regarding the ceasefire. Does your government view the things the same way?
Not at all. The national honest opposition inside Syria, and this is a news, I'm going to give it to you, will join the National Inclusive Dialogue very soon. They will be participating at the National Inclusive Dialogue very soon in Syria. And this is part, by the way, of Mr. Kofi Annan's 6 points plan. So the national patriotic opposition within Syria will be on board in this National Inclusive Dialogue. And the announcement will be issued in Damascus soon. The external opposition, the external wing of the so-called opposition, those who attend the meetings in Istanbul and elsewhere, are all being manipulated by the petrodollars as well as by some Western capitals, are all encouraged not to engage in the national dialogue, not to give up their weapons, and not to observe the deadline set up by Mr. Kofi Annan for April the 10th to stop the violence and get on board of the national dialogue. So we have a problem here. We have a dilemma. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey asked the Syrian external opposition wing outside during the meeting in Istanbul. They asked them not to engage in the dialogue, not to give up their weapons, and they provided them financial assistance as well as military assistance. They even, and here I am referring to Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, they even told the members of the so-called Free Syrian Army that they will provide them with monthly basis salaries. Then somebody should ask these countries, what are you doing? Either you should commit yourselves to Mr. Annan's mission and stop inciting to violence and manipulating the external wing of the opposition by not providing financial and military assistance, or you should say that you are seriously implicated and involved in creating a parallel track to Mr. Kofi Annan's mission in order to undermine the mission of Kofi Annan. Something is wrong in their behavior and in their policies. The Syrian government agreed to Mr. Kofi Annan's plan on the 25th of March. April the 1st, Istanbul meeting is held. What for? If Syria said a week ago that the government is on board with Mr. Kofi Annan's, why holding this meeting in Istanbul a week after? To create a kind of confusion in the mind of the public opinions? Or what? Why calling on the military, on the armed groups in Syria not to give up their weapons, not to stop their violence, while the Syrian government said a week earlier that we are on board? So everybody should stick to the fact that we should all encourage Mr. Kofi Annan's plan, and we need to get commitments from the Qatari, from the Saudis, from the Turks, from the French, from USA, that Annan should be given a chance in order to succeed in his mission. If the Syrian government observed the stopping of the violence on April the 10th, and the other side will not, who would fill the vacuum in case the heavy military units of the Syrian army would withdraw from these hotspots, and the other party will not observe the end of violence and the stopping the fire? Who would fill the vacuum? This is exactly what happened with the Arab observers when the Gulf states withdrew their observers, and they did it on purpose in order to create a vacuum that will be filled by the elements of the armed groups. This is why we are saying, Mr. Kofi Annan, please give us guarantees and commitment that those who are in Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Turkey are on board before reaching the deadline of April the 12th. In the back, please.
The way you spoke, you had talked about a lot of things concerning the PGA. You said his bias and so many others. Now I want to find out from you. I don't think you are indifferent to the decision of the General Assembly. And if you are not, either do the PGA. So, what is your view? Are you against peace returning to Syria? From your comments.
Well, thank you for this question, but it's not relevant to what I said. It's not relevant to what I said.
My question.
Of course, I am committed to peace on behalf of my government. What did I say? I have been speaking for almost 20 minutes, and you didn't get it yet? That we are on board with Mr. Kofi Annan's plan? Of course we are in favor of peace, but we want all these external interferences in our domestic affairs to stop. The Qataris, the Saudis, and Turkey are providing these armed groups with weapons. This is a violation of the international law. This is a violation of the Charter of the United Nations. The PGA today violated the rules and procedures in the presence of the Secretary General. So somebody is trying to destroy and undermine the credibility of this system. Please, be careful. Take notes. Take into consideration this analysis of these sequences of the events. Otherwise, we wouldn't understand what's going on. The PGA is in his post to represent all of us, not to fulfill and implement his country's agenda, to interfere in our domestic affairs. Nobody has the right to do that. Just because Qatar has $200 billion per year selling oil and gas, do they have the right to spend all this money in creating troubles all over the world? Somebody should stop them. Somebody should tell the Saudis to stop. It's much easier for the Saudi family ruling over the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to change the pillars of Islam rather than to change the way they are ruling the country. They are not honest. By the way, I have a couple good news for you. The Saudi Mufti, they call him the great Imam, now issued a fatwa, a consultative religious opinion, saying that the young people have now the right to enter the malls. Now they could enter the supermarkets. The young people in Saudi Arabia now could enter the supermarkets. Could you believe it? We are on April the 5th, 2012. And the Saudi Imam is still thinking about whether the young people should have access to the malls or not. The second good news, another fatwa from the same Imam saying that women could attend the football matches, but in separate places. And they should not raise their voices when they get excited by the game. And they should abstain from attracting the attention of the males in the stadium. This is the second good news. The third good news, always coming from Saudi Arabia. I don't know whether it is good or bad. For me, it is ridiculous, but I will say it. The same Imam, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, said that all churches in the Gulf area should be destroyed. And that a Christian or a Jew should not have the right to be buried in the area of the Gulf states. We are April the 5th, 2012, and we still hear such ridiculous and provocative statements coming from Saudi Arabia on behalf of people who call themselves the custodians of the holy shrines.
I'm sorry, I've been raising my hand since the beginning. And
Sorry,
I feel you're doing to me what you were done this morning.
I didn't pay attention, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Your government said that they have partially withdrawn from 3 cities. And American Ambassador Susan Rice said this morning that they know that actually the violence have intensified in those 3 cities. Even yesterday was the worst under what they apparently know. And she said that they want actions and deeds instead of words. What do you think is happening here? Why there is such a disagreement in what your government is saying and what the U.S. say they know?
The U.S. officials, USA withdrew their ambassadors in Damascus, as you know. And they shut down their embassy. So when the American ambassador says that she knows, actually she doesn't know because she doesn't have any eyewitnesses on the ground.
But they have plenty of satellites and
Hold on,
sources
hold
and
on.
intelligence.
That did not serve them at all. When they invaded Iraq, they falsified facts. When they invaded Afghanistan, they falsified facts. They do have all kind of sophisticated technology, but they don't take good advantage of them. What she said, by the way, what she said was partially true, because indeed the hostilities escalated in some areas in the country. And the reason is related to what I have already elaborated, what I have already explained to you. The armed groups did not yet inform Mr. Kofi Annan that they will respect and observe the deadline, the 10th April deadline date. And this is why they think that once the Syrian government has committed itself to the end of violence, they could fill the vacuum. This is why when they heard, the armed groups, when they heard that the Syrian government withdrew some units from some areas, immediately they jumped to fill the vacuum and create a fait accompli on the ground.
And do you think they have heavy weapons like the Syrian army?
No, they don't.
So how can they fill up that vacuum?
By the way, they killed 3,000 people so far, 4,000 people.
But if there are 9,000 dead, so that still means that they have 6,000 people dead, even under your account.
Whatever, one victim or 10,000. This is too much for us. This is too much for the Syrian government and for the Syrian people. When I asked the PGA today to observe a minute of silence, he didn't accept because he doesn't care about the blood of the Syrian people. If he cares, he would have observed a minute of silence for the souls of the Syrian victims. So somebody is trying to take great advantage of any vacuum that might be created by the withdrawal by the government of its heavy weapons from the hot spots. And by the way, the Syrian government withdrew indeed some military units. Every day they do it, and they inform Mr. Kofi Annan about it. So Mr. Annan is aware on a daily basis of the withdrawal of some military units from the hot spots.
But he himself said that he couldn't corroborate it.
Who?
Mr. Kofi Annan said he just had that statement from your government, but he couldn't corroborate it.
When he will send the observers, they will check it on the ground.
Mr. Jaffery,
But we need another commitment from the other parties. Otherwise, that would be a Tom and Jerry game.
But do you mean that you're not going to comply with that commitment unless
No,
you have their
we are not
word?
saying that. No, you know what? What will happen is exactly similar to what happened with the Arab League's observers' missions. And you will see. And you will see.
just to follow up on the question just asked, Mr. Annan said not only that he couldn't corroborate some of the information that was being given, he said there had been reports, or the government had said it had partially withdrawn from 3 cities, but clearly he said the military operations were ongoing and the violence hadn't stopped. So what is your intention in terms of stopping the military operations completely? Is the intention to do it by the 10th of April or to continue depending on the circumstances on the ground? And my second question...
Hold on.
Yes.
Your first question. The Syrian government is committed to making the mission of Kofi Annan's a successful one. Second, we are acting according to the provisions of Mr. Annan's plan. Third, Mr. Annan's plan acknowledged in the negotiations with him as well as with his teams in Damascus, acknowledged the government's right to protect the civilians from the armed groups. Number 4, the withdrawal of the heavy weaponry will take place by April the 10th. Number 5, we need a crystal-cut commitment and a guarantee by Mr. Annan himself, after he consults with Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the others, that once the government will observe and will respect the end of violence, the other parties will do the same and will not fill the vacuum. Could I be more clear than this?
And will you need that guarantee before you finish your pullout, Mr. Jaffery?
That is an integral part of the common understanding between Mr. Kofi Annan and the Syrian government.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for this briefing. My name is Abadi. I'm from Le Dossier. From Le Dossier newspaper.
Le Dossier. Les Dossiers.
I have been here at the United Nations for over 45 years, both as UN official as well as correspondent afterwards. And I have seen diplomatic quarrels both within the General Assembly as well as in the Security Council, even during private consultation, which I had the honor to serve.
Your wisdom.
I have never seen such strong attack of one diplomat against the other, although I have witnessed many attacks during.
It's not personal. It's against the policy of his country.
It's
not personal.
And I understand exactly how you feel, but I suppose that the President will have an opportunity to answer questions.
What is your question?
Kofi Annan says that in order to seize all the violations in Syria, you need an incredible system of supervision. What is, in the Syrian government's view, credible? What kind of system do you consider to be credible? Does it imply a military component in it or not?
Mr. Annan's plan is a comprehensive one. It doesn't only state or speak about the deployment of the observers. It addresses many important points. This is why it's called 6-point plan. One of them is the deployment of the observers, but the others are not less important. So we should look at the picture in its entirety, in its comprehensiveness. And I'm glad that the Syrian case has attracted your attention after 45 years of serving as a reporter at the United Nations. That means it's worth it. So we have to look at the issue in its panoramic dimension, rather than to focus on one point. But I will not disappoint you. I will answer your question by saying that by common agreement between Kofi Annan and the Syrian government, one component of the plan, which is the deployment of the observers, will take place. So we are not hiding the truth. But everything will be under, in respect of the Syrian sovereignty. Everything will be led Syrian process, Syrian-led process. So the government will be there. The government will be there in the implementation of each one of the components of Mr. Annan's plan. We are a sovereign state. We are keen interest in safeguarding our political independence and our sovereignty. We are not a banana republic. And everybody knows that. It took them 2 weeks to put Egypt on its knees. It took them 2 weeks to put Tunisia on its knees. It took them 1 year, and then they gave up with Syria. Thank you. Matthew, please.
Yes, just to try to drill down into what happened earlier today, I asked the spokesman for the Secretary General why the UN TV cut off. And he said, I would like your response. He said it was an informal meeting, so these are generally not televised, but because Ban Ki-moon spoke and the PGA and Kofi Annan, there was, quote, evident public interest. So they televised that portion, but not the other. I wanted to know what you think of that response, and also more generally, what you think of the Secretary General's role in this year that you've talked about. I mean, he's acknowledged taking flights from the Qatari government. He's in most circumstances, he says that things are up to my comment, for example, on hiring an alleged war criminal as his own advisor. But in this case, he's taken a different approach. Do you think so, and if so, why?
Well, actually, before the start of the meeting of this morning, I talked to the Secretary General, and he commended the Syrian government's commitment towards Mr. Kofi Annan's plan. He did not criticize the position of my government. On the contrary, he encouraged us to go ahead in implementing this 6 points plan. So but what was worth it to notice actually is that the PGA, while violating the rules and procedures and usurping his post and exercising this diplomatic and media terrorism against me and against my delegation, he did all that in the presence of the Secretary General. And that, in my humble opinion, was also another insult to the intelligence of the Secretary General.
The Secretary General seems to have a slightly different interpretation of the situation than you did. He said today that despite the Syrian government's acceptance of the Joint Special Envoy's plan of initial proposals to resolve the crisis, the violence and the assaults in civilian areas have not stopped. The situation on the ground continues to deteriorate. Deteriorate would suggest it's getting worse, not better. Now, the other thing I think I heard you said was that the Syrian government would not meet the April 10th deadline if the opposition did not have a ceasefire by that time?
No. It seems you didn't hear what my answer to your colleague. I didn't say that. I said those who will not commit themselves to respecting and observing the end of violence by April the 10th should bear the consequences of their acts. It will be up to Mr. Kofi Annan to come and brief everybody in here about who is violating who, about who is violating what. So we are...
But by the 10th of April, the equipment and the soldiers will be moved out.
Heavy weaponry will be withdrawn from the population centers. But the police and the enforcement law forces will be there. And Mr. Kofi Annan knows that. This is part of the deal.
Regardless of the behavior of the opposition.
This has nothing to do with the behavior of the opposition. Okay. We are talking about stopping the violence, not deploying police forces. Okay, the deployment of the police is to protect the civilians.
Okay, what do you say to the Secretary General's harsh words about the acceptance of the plan, and yet the situation continues to...
These are not harsh words. These are factual. He is right. Mm-hmm. In some hotspots, yes, the situation is escalating. And I explained why. Because the armed groups are taking advantage of the absence of any commitment by the Saudis, by the Qataris, by the Turks, about respecting and observing the end of violence by the deadline set up by Kofi Annan's, April the 10th.
Mr. Ambassador, you complained about the Qataris not consulting you in advance of holding this conference today.
He did it 4 times before.
Okay. But with regard to this meeting today, as you know that Kofi Annan has been mandated by the General Assembly, a resolution, and not by the Security Council, and he would have at one stage to report back to the General Assembly. If you were consulted in advance and given the opportunity just to be asked, would you be able to say no?
Yes.
Why?
I wouldn't have said no.
Okay.
But I would have the opportunity to express my government's position. We are here member states. We are not members YouTubes. We are not members newspapers. We are member states. We have the right to convey our official position to the PGA as well as to the other member states. This is a very serious issue.
So you would have accepted the convening of this meeting for Kofi Annan to report back to his employer?
Why not?
Yes. But you would have insisted on the right to
address the meeting and to have the media coverage so that the international public opinion would have heard the Syrian government's official position.
Thank you very much. How far your government are going to cooperate with Kofi Annan, and what are your expectations from him?
When we declared our commitment towards the success of Mr. Kofi Annan's mission, we did it on the 25th of March, at a time where nobody was expecting the Syrian government answer to be positive, but it was positive. So we told him on the 25th of March that we are on board. Immediately, starting from the 26th, the escalation of the military operations by the armed groups has escalated. Why? Because they knew at that moment that the Syrian government would take away any justification from the armed groups to continue their military attacks. A week after the Syrian official commitment towards guaranteeing the success of Mr. Kofi Annan's, the enemies of Syria met in Istanbul and declared their other commitment to provide the military groups with arms and weapons, to send them salaries for the members of the so-called Syrian Military Free Army, as well as to send them and provide them with weapons. So either we are working, collectively speaking, through the UN channel, or we are all working through different parallel tracks and channels. It seems these 71 states who gathered in Istanbul did prefer their own track at the detriment of the United Nations track. So those who have great interest in undermining the mission of Kofi Annan is not the Syrian government. It's somebody else.
One last question,
Ambassador, two questions, one very short. How soon could observers start arriving in Syria once these deadlines are met, if they're met? And then the second question, one of the diplomats after the GA session was speaking about your request for a minute of silence, and he was quite derisive, I would say, about it. He said that the Syrian government was responsible for most of these deaths, and so it was, what he said, were crocodile tears coming from you. How do you respond to that kind of sort of derisive view coming from some Western countries?
This is a provocative way of assessing what's going on the ground. Let's suppose for the pleasure of talking that he was right. Actually, I didn't ask to observe a minute of silence for the souls of the victims who were killed by the armed groups. Exclusively and only. I said a minute of silence for the souls of all the victims in Syria. All the victims. Whoever is behind the killings. But the point was that they don't care about the Syrian blood, whether it is coming from the ranks of the government forces or from the rank of the armed groups or the opposition or the civilians. Their main interest is to create and to implement their own interventionist agenda into our domestic affairs. If he was really sincere about being keen interest of safeguarding the Syrian blood, if he was a little bit smart, he would have played this game and stood for one minute of silence. But unfortunately, he wasn't.
Master, on this follow what Louis said about this, deployment of observers and monitors, which is essential if once the ceasefire is reached. So, do you think that they will have complete freedom to, monitor the ceasefire?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Because as I said in answering the question of our colleague here present, I said the plan of Kofi Annan is about 6 important steps, not only one. Once implemented on the ground, you will see that in principle, in theory, the violence should end. As far as we are concerned, the way we look at it, in theory, if we implement and everybody is committed to the 6 points plan, things should be very quiet on the ground. Because the issue is not only about deploying observers. The deployment of the observers, you know why? What is the main task of that? Is to supervise and make sure that the implementation of the 6 points is going on very well. So they are not going to control or monitor the Syrian army or the Syrian police or the Syrian authorities. They are going there to double check and to supervise and monitor the implementation of, by all sides, of the 6 points plan. Please. This is the last question.
Deputy Mr. Nasser al-Qudwa has been conducting many talks with what you describe as external Syrian opposition. Have you taken these talks that he held and the results of these talks, which we hear at the highest level at the UN that they have been very encouraging from the Syrian opposition, have you taken them into account, or is it because Nasser al-Qudwa is you have a position from Nasser al-Qudwa you haven't?
I haven't heard, neither my government did, any encouraging news coming from the external wings of the armed groups. I haven't heard so far any positive.
Are you privy to the results of his meetings?
I am what?
Are you privy to the
Are you
aware of the results of his talks with the
We
Syrian?
deal with Mr. Kofi Annan in his capacity as a special envoy of the United Nations.
Has he informed you?
Only.
Has he informed you? Has he informed you of Nasser al-Qudwa's talks?
I don't know. I'm not aware.
Mr. Annan
I'm
said
not
in
aware.
his speech today that the opposition, all elements of the opposition, had committed to the plan. So he himself is saying that they're on
Excellent,
board.
excellent. We need it in a written form.
So you don't believe him?
We need it in a written form. The way we informed him that we are on board, we send him a letter. This is going to be part of history. We need a written commitment by everybody, including the Imam of Saudi Arabia,